everyone, and welcome to Countering Hate, a Greenburgh cable access program discussing trends in hatred, bigotry, and discrimination, and how we can best counter these things here in our community. I'm your host, Jake Weiss, and I'm a senior at Edgemont High School. When discussing hatred and its manifestations on local, national, and global scales in 2026, it's nearly impossible to neglect to discuss the worrying abundance of antisemitism. According to data from the FBI, in 2025, there were some 2,900 hate crimes in the U.S. in which people were targeted for their religion, and about 1,800 of those religion-based hate crimes, or 62.7% of the total, were directed against Jewish people. Some of these offenses took scarily violent forms, such as a deadly shooting outside the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C., a fatal flame-throwing attack targeting Jews in Colorado marching for the release of Israeli hostages held in Gaza, and an arson attack on the home of the Jewish governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, which had anti-Semitic motivations. In Australia last December, 16 people were killed and over 40 others were injured when ISIS-inspired terrorists committed a mass shooting at a Jewish community celebration of Hanukkah at Sydney's Bondi Beach. These attacks and others have left 91% of American Jews feeling less safe than before, and 31% of American Jews have personally experienced some form of anti-Semitism over the course of the past few years. And this is from a recent survey done by the American Jewish Committee. Here with me to discuss these trends, their local impact in Westchester, and other similar topics is Rabbi Annie Tucker, the Senior Rabbi at Temple Israel Center in White Plains, where I'm personally very lucky to be a congregant. Rabbi Tucker, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Jake. This is such an important topic. I really appreciate you bringing it to the attention of our community, and it is a special pleasure to be in conversation with you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So before we dive too far into our discussion, I just want to address a particular question. What is a rabbi for the viewers who might not know, just in simple terms, and what are some of the duties and responsibilities that a rabbi has?
Yeah, great. So a rabbi is more than anything else a teacher. That's really what rabbi means. But a rabbi serves as the spiritual and religious leader of the Jewish community. So I work in a synagogue at Temple Israel Center, and some of the things that I do include leading religious services, teaching teens and kids and adults, overseeing life cycle events like weddings and funerals and baby namings, providing pastoral care, so visiting people when they're sick or going through difficult times, and then sort of running a very busy and active synagogue with all the programming and membership and other needs that any community has.
Yeah, sure. Now, Rabbi Tucker, you were the first female senior rabbi in Temple Israel Center's history, and when you first became the senior rabbi at Temple Israel Center a few years ago, it generated quite a lot of attention in Jewish media, which suggests that it's unusual for women to be rabbis, even though women have been ordained as rabbis in the U.S. for over 50 years now. What is your perspective on this, and do you feel that you have helped break a glass ceiling of sorts?
That's a really sweet question. As you mentioned, women have been rabbis in the conservative movement in my denomination for about 40 years, and in the United States for about 50 years. So, in certain ways, that's a very long time, and in certain ways, when you think about the arc of Jewish history, it's actually a pretty short time. So, it's amazing to see the great advances that we've made. There are more and more women becoming rabbis, which is a really exciting thing to see. I think one of the reasons that my promotion to this job got so much attention is that while there are plenty of women serving as rabbis, it's still less common to see women serving in the most senior roles. So as senior rabbis of the largest congregations, our congregation, Temple Israel Center, is both a large and very prominent congregation. So there tend to be fewer women in those roles. And I hope that, that just as I have had amazing models and path setters before me, that perhaps I can serve in that role for the next generation of Jewish women.
Yeah, I hope so. I'd like to now turn back to anti-Semitism, which I spoke a little bit about to introduce the program. So those statistics from the FBI are obviously harrowing, with Jews accounting for 62.7% of religion-based hate crimes in the U.S. in 2025, despite accounting for just 2.4% of the U.S. population. Why do you think there is so much anti-Semitism right now, and what do you think we can do about it?
So I first wanted to start by defining anti-Semitism, or explaining how I think about
important.
anti-Semitism. One of the best definitions of anti-Semitism I found comes from Yossi Klein Halevi. I'm a Israeli thought leader, who defines anti-Semitism as equating the Jews with the very worst thing that society is experiencing at a particular time, or the very worst idea society has at a particular time. So in the early rabbinic period, the very worst thing that people could imagine would be to be anti-Christian, anti-Jesus. So Jews were accused of being Christ killers. And in the Nazi era, the very worst thing was to be a race polluter. And so Jews were accused of having mixed blood or tainted blood. And in our contemporary times, the worst thing that we can imagine is to be colonizers and perpetrators of genocide, and you hear that those tropes are exactly the ones that are being applied to the Jews. And so the reason that I start with that definition is that some people will think or say that anti-Semitism has increased or exploded because of the war in Gaza. And while we can talk about that, I think certain manifestations have increased since the war. I think it's important to note that anti-Semitism sadly was there before the war, and really I think is a manifestation of greater trends in society. Things like fear and instability. We know from the Holocaust and other times that when there's societal instability, Jews become scapegoats. I think some of that's going on. We're seeing a lot of polarization and hateful language and hateful speech. I think that contributes to anti-Semitism. I think social media in lots of pernicious ways, the ability to spread untrue or damaging information quickly and virally. I think that's contributed to anti-Semitism. So it really is a really important and really difficult issue.
That's a very good segue actually into my next question, which is a little bit about anti-Semitism in the context of Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7th, 2023, and the ensuing war in Gaza and subsequent wars that Israel has fought in Lebanon and Iran. And there's been a lot of debate and discussion about at what point criticism of Israel and its policies and actions turns into anti-Semitism, and if anti-Zionism, which is opposition to Israel's existence as a state, is anti-Semitic, and if anti-Zionism is not inherently anti-Semitic, at what point does it become anti-Semitic? What is your approach to tackling these questions?
Yeah, it's such an important question. First of all, I do think that there is a difference between legitimate criticism of Israel and anti-Zionism. I think that criticizing Israel, criticizing any state is important. It's an important civic function. It's something that we as Jews have a proud history of doing. But when I think about when criticism of Israel turns into anti-Zionism, I think about a couple of things. The first is the bedrock for me of legitimate criticism of Israel is an acceptance of Israel as a Jewish state, as a state that has a right to exist and protect itself like any other state. If you can't sort of admit to that, accept that, then I think we're already in the realm of anti-Zionism.
Right. And back to the second part of that question, like, at what point do you feel that anti-Zionism becomes anti-Semitic if it is not inherently so, or do you feel it is inherently so?
So the two other things that I think about, once we sort of have established the right of the state to exist, is number one, is a person sort of applying the same values, metrics, concerns that they apply to Israel to other places in the world, right? If they're concerned about Israeli aggression in Gaza, are they also concerned and fighting against Russian aggression in Ukraine? If they're concerned about humanitarian suffering in Gaza, are they concerned about humanitarian suffering in other parts of the world? When someone is only focused on Israel, hyper-focused on Israel, making Israel out to be sort of the sole perpetrator of these kinds of crimes, that's one hint to me. And the second thing I would say is that when all Israelis or all Jews are sort of implicated by the policies of a government or a state, that's another time I start smelling anti-Zionism, that we're able, as Americans, as citizens of other countries, to make a distinction between a citizen of a country and the government that represents it. And when all Jews or all Israelis are sort of implicated by Israel, that also, to me, starts creeping from anti-Zionism, from legitimate criticism to anti-Zionism.
And do you feel that the nature of anti-Semitism has changed since the October 7th attacks and the wars that have ensued since then? And if so, how?
Yeah, I mean, look, it certainly has become more urgent, more more present, sort of more violent, especially on college campuses. Sort of the tenor of the conversation. That certainly is something that has increased tremendously. I think college campuses and social media are the two places where we're seeing the most that really increased energy, but I think in other communities as well, it really has increased in intensity for sure since October 7th.
Yeah. And what unique perspective do you feel that you have on anti-Semitism as a rabbi, being a Jewish community leader?
Yeah, so look, I don't know that I have any sort of intellectual or even historical perspective as a rabbi, but what I can say is that I spend time with a lot of Jews and I know what it means to be in community, and I can share sort of the impact of anti-Semitism on our communities, and it's really painful. It's really scary. It's really painful. There's a huge financial cost, as you well know, the amount of money that the Jewish community is now paying for security for every time Jews gather is really a terrible tax on the Jewish community. But even more than the physical burden, I think Jews feel unwelcome sometimes in their communities. They feel afraid, and that really wears on people emotionally, spiritually, psychologically.
How have you seen anti-Semitism manifest itself on a local level here in Westchester?
So look, I love the Westchester community, and I think there are so many great things about being here and so many examples of partnership and cooperation. There also, unfortunately, have been anti-Semitic incidents in this community, from incidents at Scarsdale High School, Israel Culture Club fire put in a urinal, swastikas, the defamation of a Jewish ice cream parlor in Scarsdale, the sort of anti-Semitic graffiti on a street in White Plains. We are seeing it, unfortunately, here as we're seeing it in other places, and it's something to really be aware of and fight against.
Right. And has it been directed at you or Temple Israel Center as an institution or any congregants, if you feel comfortable sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah, thank God. I personally and Temple Israel Center, sort of as an institution, has not experienced any anti-Semitism, but certainly my congregants have. Those who live in Scarsdale and are at Scarsdale Public Schools are really concerned. Folks who have kids on college campuses, people talk to me at their places of employment. They are made to feel unwelcome sometimes. And I'll share just a brief incident or a story that sort of, I think, speaks to what these times feel like. This ended up not being an anti-Semitic incident, but you'll hear why I'm sharing it. Early in my first year at Temple Israel Center, we have a very high-tech security system, and it got tripped accidentally, but we thought in the moment that there was an active shooter in the building. And so we locked down, and it was not a drill, it was not a test. We actually believed there was an active shooter in the building. And, living under that kind of fear, it was really one of the scariest experiences I've ever had as a rabbi. And even though, thank God, it was a false alarm and it was not triggered by anything anti-Semitic, that sense of fear, unease, believing that it could be true, that is something that I think a lot of us are really holding.
Yeah, definitely. And what types of heightened security measures has Temple Israel Center as an institution, as well as the broader Jewish community, had to take in these recent times with the uptick of anti-Semitism?
Yeah, so I can't talk too much about the specifics because it would be a security
Sure,
breach,
yeah,
but
no,
what
I
I
understand
can
that.
say is that this is a real concern. It's we have a security task force. We work with an external security company.
Right.
We have guards around our building and all the precautions that we feel like we need to take. And it both is, as I said, a financial burden, but also even though we do it and we do it because it's the right thing to do, entering a building that has a big security gate and being greeted by a security guard and all of those things, it takes away a little bit of a sense of welcome. And it also, although all those apparatuses makes one feel safer, they also have you come into a space recognizing that you need this protection, and there's something really sobering about that.
Right. Yeah. How have you seen other types of hatred and bigotry, aside from anti-Semitism, manifest themselves locally here in Westchester?
Look, I think unfortunately there is sort of this atmosphere of hatred that has continued to grow over the last few years, whether it's directed against immigrants, or whether it's directed against the trans community or
Right, yeah.
against the Muslim community. So certainly, I don't think any group is immune from that kind of hatred. It does feel like the Jewish community, when your statistics sort of bore this out, has had this extra burden. But I think that there's unfortunately intolerance and suspicion and prejudice that I think, as I mentioned earlier, is sort of an outgrowth of people feeling a little bit unsafe, a little bit uneasy. It's easy to blame other people
Right, yeah.
when times feel a little bit shaky.
Yeah. And have you done work with local leaders and other minority groups to combat hatred and bigotry more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, Westchester is amazing in that it has a number of different forums for faith leaders of different communities to come together. So Westchester Jewish Council is one organization that convenes interfaith leaders. I actually had the opportunity to go to Israel with a group of interfaith leaders, so that was really an amazing experience. White Plains also has a White Plains Interreligious Leaders Council, so we come together for joint programming. And then our synagogue has tried to create partnerships also with different faith communities. And I think coming to know each other and trust each other and be able to act together on issues of joint importance, that's the way you create a safe and secure and close-knit community.
Yeah, sure. Now, while almost all congregants at a synagogue are obviously going to be Jewish, they could still be diverse in their backgrounds, their opinions, their walks of life, and their family lives. What is your approach to ensuring that all congregants at Temple Israel Center can feel welcome, valued, and a part of the community?
It's a really great question, and this is something I think about a lot these days. We all are Jewish for sure, but there is enormous diversity at Temple Israel Center in terms of American politics, in
Right,
terms of
yeah.
Israeli politics, in terms of how much people want to hear about politics from the rabbi at
Hmm.
all, not to mention other kinds of diversity, which I can speak
Yeah.
about too. And in these times that are so polarizing, I think that synagogues, faith communities, are really one of the last places where people who are quite different in all these political ways actually come together in joint purpose. And so we can be a model of holding people together and creating dialogue across difference. That's something I think about a lot, I talk about a lot. It's really, really important to me. And I think some of the ways that we do that is we listen openly with curiosity. I think we avoid ad hominem attacks, right? We
Right,
listen to
yeah.
people's ideas rather than criticizing the person. We have humility, we're gentle with our own speech, and we look for places of commonality and sort of assume best intents, and see conflict as a conflict between values, often two very important values that one prioritizes a little bit more and one is forced to prioritize a little bit less, but
Mhm.
that reasonable people can disagree about a lot of things, and still find a way to hold together.
Yes, that's actually a great segue into my next question, which turns back to the topic of Israel and the conflicts in the Middle East. So, obviously, the issue of the Israeli Palestinian conflict is one of the most pressing, polarizing issues of the day, with opinions and emotions being very strong on both sides of the debate. What would be your advice for having peaceful, productive dialogue with someone who has a different opinion on this issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a number of the things that I just said, and I really wish that people were working harder to have these kinds of conversations because I
Mhm.
think they feel so awkward or they feel so hard, that we shy away from them. The first thing is to really listen deeply with curiosity. I think that often when we're in conversation, especially, a potentially contentious conversation, we listen thinking about what we're going to say next, how we're going to rebut the person that we're speaking with, and really, really listening and trying to understand and asking good questions. That's a really, really important thing. I think also, again, as I just spoke about, really thinking about the issue as separate from the individual. I hear people on all sides of this issue jump to demonizing a person when they don't like their opinion, right?
Right.
And I think that that's really dangerous, both in terms of relationship and community, but it often isn't true. And so the more we can separate issues out from the people that hold the issues,
Yeah.
and then the last thing is, just as we try to be really good listeners, I think we should be really careful with our own words, that we should speak kindly and respectfully, that we should have some humility. Most of us don't have the full truth, and that we should talk in a way that even if someone disagrees with us, they can hopefully hear us. And I think that's one of the ways that we hold together.
Right. So my next question is very similar to that question. It's, does that advice that you just gave extend um, to people having peaceful, productive dialogue with someone who has a different opinion on other polarizing issues of the day?
For sure. And I wish that people were talking across difference in those realms as well, right? American politics
yeah.
are extraordinarily polarized these days. Gender identity politics, extremely polarized these days. National issues like immigration and gun control and abortion, extremely polarized these days. And I think that that one of the reasons these issues have become polarized is that we retreat to our own corners. We talk and listen to people who think exactly like we do. You know, the idea of operating in echo chambers.
Right.
You know, I'm not the first person to say this, but I think it's really quite true. And when we push ourselves to encounter an idea, an opinion that's different from our own, I think that we start both to deepen and make even more sophisticated our own thinking, but even more so, we hold together in community, which as Jews, I certainly think we need to do. We're too small not to. And as Americans too, I'm concerned about our country sort of ripping apart at the seams.
Yeah. Um, so I think we're getting ready to wrap up here, but any last advice that you would have for people who are looking to combat anti-Semitism or any other forms of hatred or bigotry?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, first of all, education is really important. You know, to understand some of the rhetoric, some of the assumptions, frankly, some of the misinformation that's coming out about Jews, about Israel, about Gaza. I think also to be an upstander, and I say this especially actually to people who are not themselves Jewish, that when you hear or encounter or see anti-Semitism or misinformation, to stand up and rebut it. And then the last thing I would say is for members of the Jewish community that it can feel like a really scary and unsure time, but the best advice that I have is to continue to be proudly and unapologetically Jewish. We are an amazing people who have a lot to be proud of and have survived and thrived for thousands of years, and I am quite certain we will for thousands of years more. And this is a time to lean into our Jewish identity rather than shy away from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we wrap up, just one last question. You mentioned education, which is really important. It was a focus of another discussion that I had. What are some of the educational initiatives that you feel are most important and valuable for fighting anti-Semitism and other forms of hate and pushing back on a lot of the misinformation that we're seeing right now?
Yeah, look, I mean, you know, Temple Israel Center has offered, and there certainly is a plethora of programs that are specifically about sort of fighting anti-Semitism, combating anti-Semitism, sort of talking points or strategies.
Right.
I think that that's important. I think when I talk about education, what I think is even more important is just staying abreast of the issues. You know, reading news coverage of Israel, especially Israeli news coverage. There are a number of amazing podcasts out about Israel. I really love stuff from the Hartman Institute. I also love Dan Senior's stuff. So there's great places to get both information and news. The Times of Israel has a daily podcast that sort of is like a briefing of the day. That's a place that I look to for, you know, sort of daily news. So to sort of understand what's going on there and to listen and engage with trusted folks who are thinking about these issues deeply.
And has Temple Israel Center extended some of these educational initiatives out to the broader community and the institutions in it?
We have an amazing program called the Rabbi Gordon Tucker Fund. Program. It was created in honor of my predecessor, Rabbi Gordon Tucker. It brings really high-level speakers to our community. We just had Chaviv Radagur, who is an amazing journalist and thought leader on issues of the day. We've brought Mati Friedman in the past, another journalist and thought leader on these issues. So certainly we welcome individuals from the broader community to come and be part of our programming, and it's a great opportunity to both engage in learning, but also to be part of a conversation with a community of really interested and active Jews.
Well, I think that about wraps up our conversation. Thank you so much for this very informative, productive discussion. I really enjoyed it.
It was really a pleasure for me. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
I don't know if I can find my way.